The first time that I was called a nigger, it was probably around age 16. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and being part of the South, that wasn't really something that was unheard of when I would hear other people make mention to the stories of when they were first called a nigger. Age 16, my mother and I went shopping, and being from a Bible Belt area, anytime you left the house, you were dressed by what was considered to be socially accepted. It was near Mother's Day, so she took me into this boutique to just kind of show me some things that she wanted me to look at in case I decided to go shopping there to purchase her a Mother's Day gift. We left there probably 3 or 4 weeks past, and I was at work. I was working at a place called Bojangles. That was my first job. And I still had on my uniform after making biscuits. And it dawned on me that I needed to go and purchase this gift for my mother. Returning back to this boutique, back to this store where we had received exceptional customer service, where the sales reps were attentive to every one of our needs, I noticed that now they were ignoring me. No one would come over to help me, but only one thing had changed. From the first time I was in a suit and tie, this time I'm in a Bojangles uniform. And I will never forget listening to one salesperson, the same one that had helped us before, tell the other sales rep, "Why is that nigga in here?" And for me, it was that moment that I stopped and realized, you know, is it more than just being called a nigga? Are they basing this after how I appear, how I look? I had the money to purchase the item, but it really crushed me because then I was torn between two places. Do I take the money out and purchase these things to prove to them that this little black boy really can afford the gifts that's in the store? Or do I save that money and go somewhere else where I'm valued as a person and purchase a gift?
I grew up in a small town, predominantly white. I'm almost certain that it happened. There were references, I'm sure, but memory doesn't, it's not registering when it actually.
That was a very eerie feeling. It's like the things that I had seen on TV and the movies, and it was actually happening to me, and the person that called me that was a white police officer. So it's almost like what I've seen is actually happening to me, and this thing is for real. It was an eerie feeling that stayed with me, and I remember that event like it just happened yesterday. I was 12 years old.
The first time I was called a nigger was not in the context of it being racially charged. The first time I was ever called a nigger was in the context of my own race trying to use it as a playful thing. So I've never had the experience on the interracial side, but I've grown accustomed to it within the neighborhood, within friends. So it never became a big issue until the race relations came into play.
Well, I can't necessarily remember the first time. I grew up in a white environment in the sense that I went to parochial school, and I integrated the parochial school along with my wife. That was 1950. And there were some children who were a little hostile, but I can't specifically remember any one of them using that word. However, I specifically remember an incident in the 9th grade where I was called that, and I was a freshman in high school. And it was really very shocking and demeaning because I'd heard the word before, but it wasn't something that had been specifically targeted to me. And then they turned right around and added insult to injury by saying, "Oh, but you're one of the good ones." And that has stuck with me ever since the 9th grade. And the 9th grade for me was in 1957.
The first time I was called a nigger was probably when I was about 13 years old. I was going into a building downtown, and I held the door open for this older white lady, and I guess I scared her. She said, "Oh, just go away, you damn stinking nigger." And I'm like, I don't know what it was like, because I think I just froze. Like, I could not believe that this woman just said that to me. And I didn't know, I just stood there, and she walked away. I didn't know what to say to her. I wasn't thinking fast enough to give a response. I was like, how did you address it? What? And then, of course, when it's all over, I thought of everything I should have said. All the things I should have said, all the things I should have done. None of those things happened. But what was it like the first time? It was just absolute shock.
The first time anybody used the N-word, probably when I was really little, a little girl. And I knew it wasn't something that was nice. And it had been used in the community in quite a different way, but I knew it was not something very nice.
I've actually never been called a nigger, never in my life, but I can imagine what it must be like, and my parents have told me stories, but personally I've never had that experience, and I'm thankful for that.
I was shocked. I was 19 years old, and I was in Reykjavik, Iceland. I was in the Navy, and a group of us, service member, went out into the town, and a little boy was across the street, little native boy, and he pointed at us, and he said, nigger. He couldn't even pronounce it right. And I realized he was calling us niggers. And I was shocked, but it was kind of like, wow, I'm halfway around the world and I'm being called a nigger.
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever been called a nigger. I don't think I've ever been called that word. Not that I can remember. I mean, I'm a little bit younger. I'm 32 years old, and I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, but I don't think I've, even as an adult, been called that.
The first time I was called a nigger, I really didn't know quite what that meant.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is angry, hurt, confused, because I'd heard stuff like that on like Roots, or my grandmother or grandfather would tell me things about that. But being young, being called a nigger I was angry. I was almost in a violent mode. So it was rough, it was challenging, and I learned that it was something that it wasn't cool for people just to say.
One time a little kid, she was about 5 or 6 years old, and referenced because I was black, she said she didn't like me. And then the mother, of course, she turned about 10 shades of red. And my husband said, oh, she's just saying what she's heard being said at home.
I don't really like to say the actual word, but I was called the N-word when I was in like my early 20s. I live in a predominantly African-American neighborhood, so then I went off to college and it was pretty diverse. But when I started working, I worked with the homeless, and it was a guy. He was actually mentally unstable. He was a white gentleman, and he called me the N-word, and I was so taken back by it because I mean, I knew that people still say it in a derogatory term, but I couldn't believe that he said it to me, and especially it wasn't like we had an argument or anything. Like, I was just talking to him and giving him respect. So for him to call me the N-word, I was just like, oh my God, like, people really still, like, they really say it. And his age too was alarming about it. He was like at least in his 50s or 60s. So this obviously wasn't the first time that he had called someone the N-word. And then after I was shocked, I felt really bad for him because, first of all, he's out on the street in Washington, D.C., and I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person that he said the N-word to. So if anything, if he said it to the wrong person, I'm pretty sure that they would definitely have a problem with it.
It's been a number of years since I've been in school. Given the environment and the culture and the way that time has, I would say, progressed, I would say no. The reason I say no is because there are individuals in Black history that are familiar, like the popular ones. But there are a gazillion other persons, individuals who have contributed to Black history that persons aren't aware of. So unless it's a predominantly Black institution, I would venture to say no, that there isn't enough African American history being taught.
I don't feel that enough African American history is being taught in the schools, and it's primarily because a lot of the history I've learned is through stories from my own family members, my grandmother's great grandfathers, the stories that they've been told, and the emotions that come with those stories. Those have been the most epic stories that I've learned from outside of the standard text stuff, and you find out later that some of it has been either altered or written in a fashion that fits the time that it was written.
I think that there's more so a problem as to how our story is being told. When I read what our children are being taught in the school systems today, they are being taught a certain segment of the African American history, but not so much from our vantage point. A lot of Caucasian or non-African American teachers are blamed for the disillusion or the lack of African American history being taught in the classroom. I'm not necessarily sure that I subscribe to that theory. When I look at the textbook, it's more than just the teacher. When I look at who was at the table when the textbook is being written, I would love to see more African Americans there. I would love to see more African American philosophers, more African American historians writing our story. So do I feel that history is being taught? Yes, from a certain vantage point.
I ask that question all the time, and actually I'm surprised at the lack of history, black history that's being taught. We are so far behind in educating our young black youth, particularly about us as a culture and people and all we have accomplished over the years. That program needs to be just revamped completely.
I would say it depends on where you are and what the curriculum entails. I think for the most part, it is not. African American history is American history. And when people talk about doing away with Black History Month and events as specific standalone activities, I think it's too soon for that. I think that there needs to be a better understanding that African Americans have been involved with everything, every phase of history and culture and activity of these United States. And I don't think everybody or enough people understand and appreciate that. So I would say in some places, African American history is quite adequately stirred in, but I do believe that for the most part, it is not yet adequately stirred in.
I don't feel enough African history, I don't feel like enough history is being taught in the schools today based on conversations with younger people and a lot of simple things they know nothing about. You know, they don't know who Dr. Drew was. They don't know who the heart surgeon was. They don't know anything about stuff like that. So it's like, how could you go through high school or junior high even and not know that?
We can do an awful lot more with teaching Black history in the schools today. I came up in Greensboro, North Carolina, a product of the Greensboro public school system, and we had an awful lot of Black history. So we were very steeped in Black history, and not only were we just taught Black history, but it was reinforced in things that we did, plays, activities that we did, daily life, things were pointed out to us. So I knew quite a bit of Black history coming along.
I don't think there's enough of African American history taught in schools. And as someone fresh out of the public school system, I can really speak on that because most of what I know about Black history and African Americans, even currently, was taught to me by my parents, my family, not in schools.
Well, I grew up in New York City in the 70s, and I had a lot of Afrocentric teachers in my public school. And so I was bombarded with African American history from an early age, and that's what sparked my love for African American history.
Yes, I do. I learned a lot of African American history, which I thought was kind of weird because I went to a school in Maryland. And at that time, the school I went to in Maryland was considered a high-profile school in Maryland for white kids. So, but when they said Black History Month, they meant Black History Month.
We had the basic two people, was it Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mary Buchanan Bethune, well, maybe five at the most. And then later, as you get older, and as I learned, there were lots of lots of other Black American people that we could look up to other than the ones that we were actually forced to learn or that was acceptable at that time.
When I was in school, the African American history that was taught was pretty much like in February for Black History Month, but you learned about like Sojourner Truth, you know, Frederick Douglass, but you didn't really learn about like a variety of different people's stories. Like it wasn't until I got to like college where I was able to learn about like African American studies and African studies and really learn about different people's stories, that I was able to explore like my history. But I think in school they make a good effort, especially from talking to like my mother and my grandma's generation, where there was minimal African and African American studies taught. So I think that maybe if they just teach different things besides, you know, the things that we are like accustomed to know. Like I feel like a lot of people know about like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, which is good. We still should know about them, but we should also learn about other people's stories.
When I was in school, I feel like we only got that 1 month, you know, in February, where they would talk about, you know, Black history, but none of it was really taught throughout the year. Again, I grew up in a school that was, you know, very diverse, and there were a lot of white kids there, probably more white kids than there were Black kids. But Black History Month was just, you know, 1 month. That was one time it was talked about, and that's about it. It wasn't really focused on that much.
Absolutely, yes. There's so much that I discovered that was never brought to my attention. So I had to seek it out, and it's a massive amount of information out there on the histories of Black Americans and Africans in the world.
I wouldn't say surprised. I think it's natural. Again, given the society that we live in, we're seeing more and we experience more now than we experienced in the past.
When looking at the examples that I have learned or the mentors that I have encountered growing up, the things that I learned about my history outside of the classroom was quite phenomenal. A lot of the people that have so much intellectual knowledge from slavery times to what their parents and what their forefathers told them never stepped foot in a formal classroom. So for me, life has always been a classroom as well. The little things that the neighbors could share with me, I would listen. The things that they would tell me why we do certain things in the African American history, that means so much to me. Those were things that I never learned in the classroom.
Overwhelmingly surprised, because it reminds me of what my grandfather said, that how we should aggressively seek after our own history.
I believe in the beginning, probably in high school, I was surprised at some of the facts. You know, the Black history facts that used to come, you know, things that were uncovered, and was always a surprising thing, but it was also encouragement to know that these things did exist in our past, and that our positive Black history started a long time ago.
Everything that I've learned has been taught to me like on my own. It's and I just find African American history being so important and so valuable. Right now, my granddaughter goes to an African-centered school, and African history is very important. So through that, I'm learning a lot.
Surprise is not strong enough. Shocked is more like it. Because when we grew up, we had the impression as children, and I think this is part of the problem that our race suffers now. We had the impression that blacks never did anything much, and they would treat African American history as a footnote, and they mentioned Frederick Douglass, Carter G. Woodson, George Washington Carver, and maybe Mary McLeod Bethune, all in one paragraph, and then they would just move right on. We didn't get anything about inventions. We didn't get anything about the West, settling the West. We didn't know anything about black cowboys. We didn't know anything about Benjamin Banneker. We knew that was a school name, but who he was, what he did, how he interacted, these types of first about the slavery uprising. Many of us were of the impression, and we know better now, that the slaves were very docile. We didn't hear about Denmark Vesey, and we didn't hear about Nat Turner and the others who spoke up and spoke out. So I think that this is a very good thing. But as I said, I was shocked to learn so much. And just this week, I learned that the original Lone Ranger was an African American. The ranger who inspired what became known as the Lone Ranger series was an African American. He was a runaway slave. And when Disney or maybe it wasn't, but I think it was Disney, but when they brought it to the screen many, many years ago, or to the comic books, it might have been, they made the decision not to use an African American and not to mention that point.
Not necessarily surprised. I guess they can't teach you everything, but I am excited to learn new things, which seems to happen all the time. Even listening to radio shows on the way to work, if they do a Black History moment, you know, so I never knew that. So I am surprised, but I don't think they can teach us everything at one time.
There was really so much Black history that we were taught as youngsters that I think I'm very rarely surprised by events. But maybe like the Rosewood, that was a bit of Black history that I was not exposed to.
I'm always surprised by the amount of African American history that I get from other sources. Mostly, like I said, from my parents, but also just actually looking at the internet. And I'm a student at Howard now, so I definitely get a lot there just from teachers on a daily basis talking about their experiences.
I've been surprised by the amount of history I discover on my own that I didn't learn in school, only because I think as I grew up, I started learning more and seeing more movies and reading more books and about our history and seeing more things on the news. And it's things that I don't know if they think maybe kids just can't take it, that it's a little too graphic, but the severity of like slavery and things that have happened with the, you know, civil rights movement, a lot of that is not taught in school, or at least when I was going to school, it wasn't taught as much. It wasn't talked about in the extreme way that we learn about it as an adult.
I was very surprised to find out about the other African American historians that I wasn't aware of growing up in school. There are lots of additions other than the ones that, like I said, that were basically being taught or instilled to us once I was growing up.
When I was in school, no African American history was taught to me. The only one person I learned about was George Washington Carver, and about he invented something about the peanuts and the peanut oil and things of that sort. But other than that, I didn't hear anything about Black American history.
I think I was surprised. A lot of the stuff that, like I said, I learned in college, and even like recently, like I never read 12 Years as a Slave before I saw the movie about Solomon Northup. So I think it's just mind-blowing that there's so many, I guess, people who have made an impact, and we don't really get to know about them or hear about their stories.
I don't think that focus is on African history anymore. I think the focus is more or less nowadays on American history. And I think that the African American kids, they need to learn their history more so that that can help their esteem, so that they can understand where they came from, and that they need to understand that there are others who have died for the things, the rights that they have today, so they have a better accountability.
I don't think the kids are being taught Black history. I think they're being taught the civil rights part of the Black history. I don't think kids are actually being taught the history of the African American person. I think all they're being taught is where the word nigger derived from. They're being taught Martin Luther King, and I think they're only being taught him is because of his civil rights movement. I don't think they're being taught him for who he was, how many books he's written, how he actually went to prison. That's not being taught to them. Malcolm X is being taught to them on the basis of him having power over Black people, not actually how he got to where he was and how he distanced himself from the Muslim nation. That's not being taught. So I don't think really Black history is being taught Black history to our kids now.
I think the way that youth learn about African American history should be restructured, only because I feel like they make an effort to learn about like minority history, like Hispanic Heritage Month and African American history in 1 month span. And I think that learning about your culture and your history is something that needs to be taught every day instead of just for 1 month. So with restructuring that, not only just incorporating that in world history and in the curriculum, I think that they should think about expanding and finding more people to talk about and to learn more about what African Americans and Africans have given to history. Like, for example, I remember I didn't really know about like Daniel Hill Williams, who was like the first African American surgeon to do open heart surgery. So that's a really big deal, and that's something that African Americans have given to the world of medicine.
I don't know if it should be restructured. I just think it should be more than just, you know, that one little moment in the year that they talk about it.
So I think that learning about just the different things that we have accomplished and what we have given to society will help us.
Black History Month seems to be the only time that Black history is actually taught, because there's those 28 days, so let's get all of the Black history into the 28 days, and then the rest of the year we just kind of forego it. So yes, I would venture to say.
The way in which our children, African American children, are taught in the classroom is very interesting. I feel that pedagogy should be looked at for more than one way. I do not feel that there was one way to teach a child anything, not just African American history, mathematics, science. It's more so being creative and captivating the attention of the children.
It should be structured in a manner that it will be interesting and fun for them to learn. And not only that, but every year, February, we hear about the same 6 people every year. And there's so much more. I believe that if you gave them more information about so many different people and incidents, I think it would be more interesting to them.
I believe that the way the youth is taught Black history should be an entire class, not just a portion of a history book. It should be an entire class. It should also be comprised of field trips to certain types of museums and estates, and just to give a pictorial view of what other people had to face. So I think that other things can be built in to bring the prominence of what was important.
Well, I'm not a trained educator, and so I'm not going to say as a matter of course that it should be restructured. What I think is that it should emphasize that there are other African Americans other than the ones we always hear about. Students are assigned to write a paper, do a little research, and all due respect to Dr. Martin Luther King, but there were many, many other civil rights leaders besides Dr. King. All due respect to Mary McLeod Bethune, but there were many outstanding African American women before them. So we need to have a greater exposure to find out who some of these other trailblazers were, to see what these contributions of these people were, so that when we got to a Mary McLeod Bethune or Martin Luther King, we understand in the proper context that they came at the right place, the right time. Dr. Dorothy Height's another one, but that others paved the way before them. So we as a race of people need to have a better understanding of what came before our time, so that we can have an appreciation for the fact that we always stood up, we always spoke out, but the books, the pamphlets, the articles don't adequately reflect that.
I would like to see us return to teaching Black history the way I was taught Black history, because it was incorporated so very well into so many of the things that we did in school. We did plays and so many other things like that, and I would like to see that be a way we return to teaching and enforcing Black history.
The way we learn it today, we only learn about certain figures. We learn about Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, and probably now Nelson Mandela, but they're just basic facts. It never goes in depth about what the people as a whole had to struggle with, or other individuals that aren't, you know, kind of brand names for the African American race. And it's honestly not often retained. Like, I can't tell you what I learned in 3rd grade about Harriet Tubman.
I feel that anything that we celebrate, we consciously or subconsciously say that we accept. So it does minimize the effect of what should have never been in place anyway. So I feel that as long as we support it and we glorify it, we have nothing else to talk about until we take that word back.
It annoys me because it feels like the norm when the N-word is introduced into music. It feels like the norm, almost as if the N-word doesn't have the same connotation that it had in the 60s. These verses, now it's just as if we're saying hello or how's it going, or it's comfortable to a lot of people. It feels comfortable. It's not comfortable to me. It bothers me still, but it's comfortable to a lot of people.
In today's society, when flipping through mainstream radio or music or on the television, you are bombarded by hearing the N-word. Even if you do not actually hear the word, they will strategically place the beep so you know exactly what they were referring to or speaking to. It's sad to see young African American or non-African American using these terms in the media as well as on the radio or on the internet or in casual conversation for that matter. They are young, they are bright, they're intelligent, they are articulate, but it never ceases to amaze me that they limit themselves to use such degrading language to speak to or to describe each other or use it as a term of endearment.
The use of the N-word in music today becomes confusing to other cultures, because at one point you still find people getting upset from being called the N-word, but at the same time you hear it being used on a regular basis throughout the music.
No place that word does not belong in the English language other than in the dictionary. I am unalterably opposed to the use of the N-word, and even when people refer to somebody as my, and they use the N-word, no. Because it is a demeaning term, and I don't care how you inflect your voice or what context you use, it comes from a very negative place, and in the eyes of the majority population, it still is negative, and we need to understand that and not use it as a crutch or an excuse.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I don't listen to, I'm not a rap fan to begin with, but I hear it. Of course, I hear it all the time, but it's like, what's the point of that? You know, we work so hard, and our ancestors, our parents, everybody's worked so hard to get us past that, and then it's just thrown out like that. I don't understand that at all.
Atrocious. It has been taken to an extreme that I think is just, it's ridiculous. It just shows a lack of self-restraint. It shows a lack of appreciation, I think, and a lack of respect.
The use of the N-word in music, it's so excessive and unnecessary. And I understand that, you know, they're trying to take a negative word used to describe us and make it into a positive and make it into something we should embrace as a people, but I don't feel that way. And I think that we should use it less in music, because younger and younger children in the Black community are starting to listen to these messages, and they're using the N-word to describe themselves and each other, and they don't understand why they're saying it. They don't understand that it's a negative turned to a positive. They just understand that this is the way we should address each other, and that might make it okay in their minds for other people to address them in that way as well.
That is, people have become so used to using the N-word, they just throw it around like it's nothing. I think that if they actually knew someone personal in their family, one of their grandparents or someone, and spoke to them, and if that person could tell them how they were degraded and beaten and spit upon and called a nigger, and how much hate is behind that word, that they wouldn't use it so casually.
I think words have as much power as you give them. And some people are offended by that word. And I feel like when you are offended by it, it does give it a little bit of power. It gives it power. You know, it only has as much weight as you give it. And I'm not offended by the word. It's not a word that I use in my day-to-day life, but it is definitely, you know, used a lot in rap music and just in music, period. You know, I feel like if that's the way they address each other, then that's up to them. Nobody addresses me that way in my day-to-day life. even my friends. I know they use it as a term of endearment, but you know, I to each their own.
I don't want to say they're embracing it, but I think it's half and half. We still have militants out there with the heart of the 60s in them that use the word nigger and will fight you for it, whereas you have people that call the next black person nigger. To me, that's them embracing it and not letting it control them or have the hold over them that it had to their parents or their grandparents or the people before them. I just feel that the music is helping the black people to ease the word nigger onto them because we've kind of embraced it. We call the next person, what's up, nigga? We say that. They say, hey, nigga, we say hi. And I even hear white people who don't have nothing but black friends saying the word nigga out their mouth and their black friends embracing that to them because they're not letting it affect them. It's not taking a hold over them. So I think music is like a little bit of half and half, but I'm more so for it.
When we limit ourselves to just saying the N-word, it kind of gives people the power to say it of other races and cultures. I don't like when African Americans say it, so I definitely don't like it when people of other races say it. But people like use it and then they feel like it's nothing wrong with it, when it is really a big problem. It's such a derogatory term, and it has so much history and so much baggage with it that I think that people shouldn't try to give it power. It's so many other words that we can use to describe individuals besides the N-word.
I feel, I have both sides. I have two views of it. One, it's entertainment to me. So in my perception, it's just music. It's just a word. However, the perception, it probably isn't good to use as an example by entertainers that people look up to, and that's probably why the use of the word is extended now and used loosely. But I think that it should be monitored a little bit more.